sound of wind rustling through trees. A faint, unsettling whisper, the dim glow of a lone streetlight sliced through the thin curtain, pinting long skeletal fingers of light on the old wooden floor. I tossed and turned, my breath catching in the suffocating silence. That's when I heard it again, a whisper that was now painfully familiar. They never leave, they just wait. The voice was hoarse, ancient, as if it was clawing its way up from some deep, forgotten well. My eyes shot open. The room was dark, empty, just as it always was. But the phantom sensation of someone's breath, cold and damp against my ear, sent a violent shiver down my spine. This was the 7th night in a row. I had moved into this small wooden house, nestled deep in a South Korean mountain town, hoping to find peace. After the incident at the psychiatric hospital where I used to work, I needed a place to recover, a place to forget. But the silence here wasn't peaceful. It was the kind that pressed down on your chest, heavy, suffocating, and deeply, fundamentally wrong. The air was always damp, thick with the scent of wet earth and mold, even when the sun had been shining for days. During the day, everything seemed almost normal. I tried to write, to lose myself in the winding forest paths that snacked around the property. But the moment the sun dipped below the horizon, the house came alive. Faint whispers would start, like secrets being shared just beyond the range of hearing. Soft scratching sounds, like fingernails brushing lightly against the inside of the walls. And sometimes, if I listened closely enough, I could hear the distant, heartbreaking sobbing of a woman. My only neighbor was an old man who lived in a nearly identical wooden house a few dozen meters away. His face was a roadmap of sorrow, his eyes cloudy with age and something else, something I couldn't quite place. One afternoon, as I walked past his property, I saw him sitting on his porch, his hands trembling as he slowly, methodically, sharpened a small fruit knife. "Good evening, sir," I said, trying to sound casual, friendly. The old man looked up, and his gaze wasn't just old, it was piercing. It felt like he could see right through my skin, into the parts of me I kept hidden. "You hear them too, don't you?" he rasped, his voice like gravel. I hesitated. "Hear who?" "The children. They run around my house every night," he said, his eyes never leaving the grinding blade. "But they're not real. Just ... memories. You know," he added, his gaze flicking towards my house, "something bad happened in your house a long, long time ago." His words hit me like a bucket of ice water. I mumbled a hasty goodbye and hurried home, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm against my ribs. Something bad. What did he mean? Driven by a sudden, desperate need to know, I began tearing through the dusty old drawers and forgotten cupboards. In a rickety chest in the attic, I found them. A bundle of faded photographs tied together with a frayed string. There were children, laughing on the very porch I now stood on. A young woman with a heartbreakingly sad smile. And a man who looked hauntingly familiar. It was the old man from next door, but decades younger, his face not yet carved with grief. That night, the whispers were no longer whispers. They were clear, distinct, and they were all around me. I woke up in a cold sweat, my heart racing so fast, I thought it might burst. The darkness in the room felt different. It was thicker, alive, and it carried a new smell, a sickly, sweet, cloying scent, like cheap, old-fashioned perfume. With a shaking hand, I reached for the bedside lamp and flicked it on. The weak, yellow light spread across the room. And that's when I saw it. On the wall directly across from my bed, a shape was forming. It wasn't a shadow cast by the lamp. It was a figure, being drawn in real time, made of spreading black mold, slowly growing outward from the center of the wall. It had the distinct outline of a woman with long, flowing hair and a dress that seemed to ripple in an unfelt breeze. I was paralyzed. I couldn't move, couldn't scream, couldn't even breathe. I just stared, transfixed in horror, as the grotesque figure of mold filled the wall. Then, the whisper came again. "Buff, this time." It wasn't in my head. It came from the wall itself, a voice of decay and sorrow. Why did you come here? This place is not for you." That broke the spell. I bolted from the room, stumbling down the stairs in the dark, my hands slapping against the walls, frantically searching for light switches. One by one, the downstairs lights flickered on, chasing away the immediate darkness. I collapsed onto a chair at the kitchen table, my entire body trembling uncontrollably. Was this a hallucination? Was my mind finally breaking? Was it a symptom of the trauma I'd been running from the fire at the hospital? The one I couldn't bear to remember? The next morning, my eyes gritty and raw from lack of sleep, I went to confront the old man. He was sitting in the exact same spot on his porch, holding the same knife, as if he'd never moved. "What happened in that house?" I demanded, my voice cracking with exhaustion and fear. The old man didn't look at me, but through me, his cloudy eyes fixed on some point in the distant past. "That house isn't haunted, boy," he said, his voice softer now, filled with a profound sadness. "It only remembers, like I do. We all remember." "Remember what?" I pressed. He finally turned to look at me, and I saw the glint of tears in his eyes. "The fire. 15 years ago," he said, his voice breaking. "My family, my wife, and my 2 children. I was the only one who survived." I froze, the world tilting on its axis. It was only then that I noticed them. The faint, silvery lines of old burned scars, winding their way down his trembling arms, disappearing under the sleeves of his shirt. "Sometimes," the old man murmured, his gaze drifting back to my house, "the pain is so deep it carves itself into space and time. It doesn't fade. And when someone like you arrives, someone carrying their own pain, it awakens." Everything. I staggered back, a cold dread washing over me. How could he know? How could this stranger, this grieving old man, possibly know about my pain? About the child I failed to save from the hospital fire, the flames, the screams, the suffocating helplessness that had haunted my every waking moment since. That night, I didn't try to sleep. I was done running. I sat in the center of the living room, in the dark, and I waited. And they came. Not one, but 3 of them. Faint, shimmering figures glowing softly in the oppressive darkness. A woman and 2 small children. They didn't look at me, not at first. They were replaying a memory, a moment from long ago. I watched as the woman laughed, her ghostly form hugging her children close. It was a beautiful, silent scene. But then, the air began to change. Illusory smoke began to fill the room, and with it came the stench of burning wood, burning plastic, and something far, far worse, the smell of sorrow. I closed my eyes, but I couldn't shut out their agony. It poured into me, a torrent of grief and terror and loss. And in that moment, I finally understood. They weren't trying to scare me. They weren't malicious. They were trapped, just like I was, caught in an eternal, looping memory of fire and pain. When I opened my eyes, they were no longer in their memory. They were looking directly at me. The woman, her face a mask of endless grief, extended her translucent hand. It wasn't a threat. It was an invitation, an offer of shared solace in a prison of pain. And I, with my own heart, heavy with the grief I could never escape, reached out. The instant our fingers touched, the room ignited in a blinding flash of white light. The next morning, the old man stood before my house. The front door was wide open, swinging gently in the breeze. He peered inside. There were no burn marks, no signs of a struggle, only the faint, lingering scent of smoke. Min-jun, that's me, sat motionless on the floor, my back against the far wall, my eyes wide and empty. And on the wall behind me, where the mold figure of the woman had been, a new silhouette had appeared. The curled, defeated shadow of a man, formed from fresh black stains that seemed to weep down the plaster. The old man let out a long, weary sigh and turned away from the house. "Welcome to us," he whispered to the wind. And that night, in the little wooden house on the mountain, the whispers continued, but now they were joined by one more voice.